It's a pleasure having our pal Alexis here. I'm not quite sure how I met Alexis, but
You met through Mary.
I guess I met through Mary. Yeah, I guess
Mary introduced us.
all roads travel through Mary.
It was at David's Runner dinner.
Yeah, and I don't surf with Roy, but I played basketball with Alexis for quite some time, and I'm a fan of his work and what he does, and him and Dorothy are friends of mine, and Carl, it's a pleasure to have you at Fort Gansevoort.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we're super excited to learn more about what you'll be speaking about. So.
Okay, so both Carl and I are going to be speaking independently of each other. So I'm going to go first and give you a little history about my latest show in New York, which was at Salon 94 in April and May, where I did 75 drawings using the fossil record of New York City as material. And Carl is a paleontologist / generalist genius who's a good friend of mine who I called up when I was planning this show, and I said, Carl, I need someone who's really like a fossil specialist about New York City. And he's like, well, I'm the only one. And I said, that is amazing. He said, oh yeah, I'll take you around to every borough, set a day, and I had the show scheduled at Salon 94, and last November 10th, I believe, he picked me up at my studio at 9 a.m., and we got in his, you have a Jeep?
The SUV.
Right, some sort of SUV.
Big car.
And we drove first to Staten Island, then to Brooklyn, then to Queens, then to the Bronx, and then to New Jersey, and Upper Manhattan.
Manhattan, New Jersey, yeah.
And we collected, I'd say, 20 sites. Yeah. And I threw material into Ziploc bags. And over the next couple of months, I made these 75 drawings from various sites that Carl brought me to, and also the Turtle Pond in Central Park. So it's really a roundup, and it's many more could be made, of the natural history of New York City, from the fossil record to the squirrel in my backyard. And so what I'm going to show, first, all those blue dots are places I've done projects like this since 1994. And the first one was in Guyana, which is very, very high tech, right there. And 1994, I was camping in the jungle of Guyana with Mark Dion for 2 months, and I was sort of at the end of my rope. I'd run out of art materials, and he's like, Alexis, you should do a Richard Wong and go grab that mud and make a drawing of that mosquito that just bit you. And I'm like, all right. I couldn't wait to get out of there. So I started to make a number of drawings, and they ended up falling apart because they didn't have any binder. They needed matte medium or some sort of glue because the mud just falls off and cracks. I'm going to give you a little tour of some of the things I've done over the last 24 years, 2 years. So next slide, please. So there's me and Mark in our camp in 1994, and that's me on the right. And I'm drawing that, it looks like a moth. And I haven't started to do these yet. You can see that I smoked them, and we're drinking some like really hard-ass coffee. Mark's killing something in the jar. And watching it die with his magnifying glass. Classic, classic scientific endeavor. Next slide, please. These couple of images are, the upper left is me drawing a catfish on that same trip. On the upper right is me in Tasmania in 2003 with a Bennett's wallaby in Antarctica with, I believe, a crab-eating seal in 2008. Next. Burgess Shale on the upper left, that's probably your hometown, in the Canadian Rockies. Madagascar on the right, in a preserve of orphaned lemurs. Next slide. So these are the first drawings that I made using that mud from that camp that I showed you earlier in 1994. Same body of work.
So what did you show medium, Alexis? Was that just water?
It's just mud and matte medium.
Okay.
That's it. And they were small. They were like 5 by 7 or something like that when I first started. Next slide, thanks. On the upper left, these are our trip to Tasmania in 2003. And the site on the upper left is a site where someone believed they saw a Tasmanian tiger in the 60s. I think it's the Narding site, named after Hans Narding, who's a German explorer. And now, of course, we all know that the thylacine is now extinct. But the project was about taking an inventory of some of the wildlife of Tasmania. Next, go back one. That's me on in a motel, a very inexpensive motel room, drawing a thylacine made out of different mud in 2003 as well. Some other things that I've done over the years is in the La Brea tar pits out of LA. The director of the La Brea tar pits sent me a tin of tar. So I got a species list of things that fell into the tar, and as you know, it's like a giant glue trap from the Pleistocene. Magnolia on the left, a Smilodon on the right. That's some nasty ass stuff. Megatherium, a dragonfly and its prey that had been recovered. Camels used to be in North America as proboscideans, various species of elephants. I believe that's an imperial mammoth. What do you think?
Yeah, sure.
These are from Tasmania. The bat on the upper left is a fruit bat, not to be confused with our bats in North America. They're completely different, even though they fly and they're flying mammals. Made out of coal from a deforested site, a sulfur-crested cockatoo on the lower left, and a bandicoot on the right. These are more things from Tasmania. The thylacine, which of course went extinct in 1936. A weedy sea dragon on the lower left, and some tree. I have no idea what tree that is. Probably some eucalyptus. A wombat on the lower left, made out of wombat fecal matter, poop, and a Bennett's wallaby made out of bark and wallaby fur. This is a couple of years ago on Newtown Lane Beach, Newtown Beach, and that's a dead leatherback turtle that my dog was mesmerized by. I did a project at the Parish Museum last year about the east end of Long Island and its ecosystem. Next image. There's me collecting stuff, I think I can't remember what beach that is. And then the start of that project on the porch of Mel Kendrick, whose house I was staying in Sag Harbor.
Do those turtles, it's kind of unusual for them to be here, or
Well, it's dead, and it's just washed up as a carcass, and it looks pretty, dramatic, but it just happened to be right side up.
Yeah.
When I got there, it was raining, and there were gulls eating its eyes
Yeah.
and other things on its head.
How large was it? You couldn't tell the scale because of your dog.
Yeah, it's a sort of very forced perspective. They're the largest turtle, 10 feet, so yeah, they're huge. It's no Archeolon,
Hey,
but
wait, could we see it again?
yeah, go back.
Whoa.
That's amazing.
Isn't that amazing? That's my screensaver.
How big is he?
About 10 feet, 10 or 12 feet.
Was there a shell on that?
Yeah, it is a shell. It has skin, like leathery skin, that is like encased in skin. It's not like, the boundaries between shell and flesh are that severe as like in the tortoise or something like that. They're very streamlined and obviously adapted to pelagic activity, open water. So this is, I was about to go out and collect stuff from Newtown Lane Beach, and a friend of ours, Lucy Winton, texted me, Brian Hunt's.
Yeah, we know it.
Of course. She said there's a leatherback turtle carcass. If you just walk like 500 yards north of the parking lot, it's there. And I'm like, this is so great.
You probably find it with your nose, right?
I didn't smell a thing.
Really?
Yeah, it was very windy and very rainy. So, yes, I think the shot of me collecting materials from Kirk Park Beach. These are just pages from the catalog that the parish produced, but you can get a sense of some of the specimens that or drawings that I call them specimens, drawings that I made using the sand. Again, different material. This is sand from Kirk Park Beach. Next image, please. Hook Pond, which is like on a golf course. So of course it's all like invasive species and shit that's gonna fuck you up, like ticks and mosquitoes and stuff like that. Vineyard Field Pond, which is right behind the Bridgehampton Museum of Natural History. And they have a fantastic resource of like tiger salamanders and all these herbs. That's me in Riverside Park last year. It actually says at the bottom, October 10th, 2017, that Dorothy took of me. And there's Carl, we'll go back, on the left. And this is in Clay Pit Preserve in Staten Island. Do you remember where that is? That's some, he took that photo, Where is it?
Brooklyn.
Yeah, yeah. So this is from our expedition last year. And here are some of the drawings that I made from that's not Clay Pit, no, that's from the water tunnel in Brooklyn.
Oh, it could be that too.
Yeah, must be that.
You know better.
Next, this is from my backyard. That's the squirrel that keeps eating the bird feeder. Roaches, we won't talk about those. The mouse that is in our closet, and the ailanthus that keeps on giving. This is from short-term parking in JFK. Snowy, go back. Snowy owl, black-tailed jackrabbit, or
Jackrabbit.
yeah, they're like they escaped from some crate and they live in the fucking like runway. And Canada geese, if you saw Sully or know about that, that's what brought down the plane. Next image. This is from Bruckner Boulevard, and this is the oldest of all the fossil stuff. But if you saw where I actually got this from, it was from like, oncoming traffic. And how old is this stuff, do you
It's
think?
about 380 million.
Yeah. So Carl's going to talk about the specifics of this stuff in a couple of minutes. Next image. This is from Clay Pit Preserve in Staten Island, the Cretaceous. And there happened to be, go back one, there happened to be a glossy ibis, I think, we happened to see one, so I'm putting that shit in there. Hadrosaurs, Ankylosaurs, and I guess that's a Tyrannosaur, right? Yeah. Cool. Next image. This is Ice Age mammals from Jacob Riis Beach. There's a walrus. Did you know there used to be walruses on Coney Island? It's amazing. Next image. That's from the Turtle Pond in Central Park. No, the lake in Central Park. Norway rat, goldfish, opossum, mallard duck. Next image. This is from Turtle Pond. And that's it. I love it.
Just go around and there they are.
Yep. And there's reference for my most recent painting lying on my desktop.
Fossils of Gotham.
Alexis, do you take photos sometimes of these stuff, like the animals, or?
I do. I mean, sometimes they're not really there. I know they're there. There's traces of them, or there's literature of them being there. But if I can, I will. Sometimes you have to sort of like rely on other pieces of reference or whatever.
Yeah, there are no dinosaurs.
Yeah, it's hard to do.
All right, so we can go right to the second slide. We're going to open with a seemingly simple question that is actually really, really complicated to answer, but I'm going to address first what's a fossil, because that is bearing on something I'm going to say later. And most people intuitively think of fossils as plants or animals that are old and have turned to stone. So that's a preservation-based definition, and I actually favor an age-based definition. So in other words, they just have to be a certain age to be considered fossils, and that cutoff in the definition I favor is around 10,000 years old. And of course that sounds arbitrary, but that's exactly how we mark days, months, and years. It's sort of arbitrarily placed at the beginning somewhere in time, and then you just go forward from there. And the definition of fossil has a long, twisted history, and we don't even really need the word, but we have it, so we have to make use of it. So for me, any remains or evidence of an organism that's older than 10,000 years, I call it a fossil. And that'll have bearing on something I say later. Next slide. So this is obviously where we're going to focus. And I think at least from that picture, it's painfully obvious why it's a terrible place to look for fossils. Well, there's a lot of reasons, but one is there's a city in the way. And even if you could suddenly pick up the entire city and make it go away, it's sitting on, most of it is sitting on some of the worst rock you could hope to find fossils in. It's mostly igneous or metamorphic rock, and those are just two types of rock that have formed in heat and pressure that either destroys fossils that are already there or has no potential in the beginning to have fossils. So the rock we like as fossil nerds is sedimentary rock. It's rock that's formed from sediments forming in the sea or on land and encasing parts of dead things. So there are pockets in New York that are sedimentary and have fossils. They're really hard to find, and a lot of them are underground and are only encountered through excavation or buildings or whatever. And in some places there was, everywhere there was a top layer of ice age material that had fossils in it. And most of that's gone. There's almost none of it left. So the opportunity to find more of that stuff is diminishing every day. But I grew up here, and I was always into fossils. And I'm curious, where do you find them? How far do you have to go? What's available? And everything I read about New York City says there are very few fossils that have ever been found in New York City, and it kind of stops there. But you listen to that sentence, there's something there. There's something they're leaving out. What do you mean, a few fossils? What are they? Where do they come from? How do I find some? So I, immediately started researching what was found. Are there any papers written about these things? And in my research, next slide, I came across this in the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, 1900, and it's what they think is a fossil potato that was found in Brooklyn. And I've been doing this my whole life, and I've never heard of a fossil potato. I can't even think of conditions that would give you a fossil potato. And potatoes are, at least the size of this thing, are domestic and way younger than 10,000 years. They're out of the question. What's worse is there's no described repository for that thing, and just this crude woodcut in a newspaper. So it's just sort of a hysterical little sidebar. There's no potato in New York. Sometimes a potato is just a potato, sometimes a rock is just a rock. Next slide. So, obviously, in an interest in finding out what has been found in New York, I want to find some of my own. So I knew there were some sites that were worth looking at, and I gave myself the crazy mandate of finding a fossil in every borough within 1 year. It was already crazy to even try to find them, and then restricted even more for giving myself a year. The first site I visited in November of 2007, that's the first time I went to Rockaway Beach looking intentionally for fossils. I went with the New York Paleontological Society, and they do trips around the area, and that was very interesting to me, go there with people who've already done this and learn the ropes. And they're not common, but you can find fossils on the beach there of seashells and crabs and things that are almost identical to the ones that live there today. And in the center of the lower picture, that was 2013. I've been there many times doing this now because it's really fun. That's a fossil oyster in the center. And the white is the oyster shell, and the rest of it, the gray stuff, is the matrix or the rock that's attached to it. And that's the only way you know it's a fossil. And that's a rock called the gardener's clay, which is a formation of rock that's out off the shore and gets torn up, and bits of it get thrown on the surface with fossils in it. So if you go out there and you find shells sticking out of rocks that look like this, that's what they are. They're fossils. They're really, really old, comparatively old. So next slide. These are two other things that I've seen there. The one on the left I found, it's hard to see in this light, but it's a chunk of gardener's clay that has a whole bunch of little scallops in it. And on the right is a crab. You can probably make it out. It's the bottom part of a crab. I haven't yet to find a crab, but that's one of the things that keeps me going back there, because they're a little more charismatic than clams. And they're really easy to spot, not just because of the matrix that's on them, but because they turn dark. They don't look like modern crab shells on the beach. So next one. So another spot that I read about as being an easy spot to find fossils is Tottenville in Staten Island, which is basically the extreme southern end of Staten Island. And it's a good spot because it has an enormous beach full of pebbles, and it's not overbuilt, and this is probably the same kind of beach that's been there for thousands of years. And almost immediately we found fossils, but they're pebbles and rocks that have really, really old fossils that were probably brought in by a glacier. So the glaciers in the Ice Age came down from the north, pushing a wave of rocks ahead of them. And when they melt and draw back, they leave this line of rocks. And most of New York City is what we call a terminal moraine. It's the rocks that were left here as the glaciers went away. So they're not animals that ever lived in New York City, but they are New York City fossils. And it's really hard to backtrace where they came from because they're stripped from their original place and brought, maybe hundreds of miles down south and dropped in the city. But that's a good spot if you ever want to find some fossils in New York. Next slide. Around this time, this guy is Eric Bard, and he, for a while, had a blog about natural history in New York City. He does other kind of things now along the same lines. And he caught wind of what I was doing and got really jazzed and wanted to follow me around and maybe write a little thing up for his blog. So I took him out to Tottenville, same spot, in the summer of '08, and we found the same kind of things. It was pretty easy to find stuff there. But you have to have the eye. I've been doing this for years. He couldn't find anything, and he was getting angry at me because of possible. Everywhere. So next slide. The next spot I hit was Manhattan, figuring this has got to be the beast. This is going to be the hardest one. If I can get Manhattan out of the way, the rest of them should be easy. And as you can imagine, finding a natural spot in New York City is really, really hard. I've heard of people finding rocks in Central Park with fossils in them, but that's such a hit or miss thing. I didn't know where to look for them in Central Park. So I don't even remember how I found this, but at the extreme northern end of Manhattan is this miserably tiny beach, just at the exit of the Harlem River where it hits the Hudson River. It's probably as big as this room. And I spent about half an hour on the beach picking up rocks in the beds and checking them out. And one little pebble, it's literally this big, I whacked it open and there was a shell inside. I got Manhattan. I got Harlem. So that was really exciting. I was probably the only person I could get excited by that, but it was onward after that. So next slide. This is a close-up of a rock that gave me the Bronx later in 2008, September of 2008, black ones. So my wife and I, that's her over there, Fiona. She was with me in Tottenville and she came to this site too. And it's just a little river in Riverdale Park in the Bronx. And that was a good place to look because there's rocks in the stream bed that originated in the Bronx, or at least before people. And I didn't find anything at that moment that looked like a fossil, but there were rocks that looked like the right type. So one of them I brought to work and sawed it open with a rock saw and polished it, and found these two guys. On the left is a bryozoan, which is a colonial marine invertebrate, very small, they're still around today. And the right is a cross-section through a brachiopods, which is a two-shelled animal with another marine invertebrate. Looks sort of like a clam, but it's not really closely related. So they're really, really tiny. They're not extravagant or exciting, but that gave me the Bronx.
Is the left one a mollusk?
Bryozoan?
Yeah.
No, it's,
What is it, a worm?
no,
It's a separate.
bryozoan.
So similar to coral, no?
Well,
You say
similar but not
colonial.
It's its
related.
own deal.
Colonial thing with
It's a
little
squishy,
things,
whatever.
squishies, yeah. So next slide. So
Up in there.
I was kind of losing steam at this point, thinking, all right, Brooklyn is thwarting me. I made a few forays into Brooklyn to try to find stuff, and I was unsuccessful, and I thought, this isn't going to happen, and I was thinking about other things. And Eric Bard jumps back on me, and he's like, you're going to do this, and you're going to do it by the end of the year, and I'll drive you to every single place in Brooklyn that you think is good until you find something. And he was really enthusiastic, and he got me all worked up again. So I was like, all right, let's go out. I have a few ideas of spots. There's no, the potato site wasn't worth looking at, so that I had to think of places that might offer enough rocks that something brought in by glaciers might be found there. So it was places like this. This is near Coney Island. That's Coney Island in the background. This is sort of mainland Brooklyn. And it's just a beach that's littered with rocks and doesn't have anything built on it. So it's probably a remnant of a beach that's really old and might have stuff. I did find something there that probably was a fossil, but it wasn't good enough. So I said, we gotta keep looking. Next slide. And on the 9th of November, we hit, the same day actually, later on, we hit Floyd Bennett Field and saw this gorgeous beach, gorgeous from my perspective. And half an hour looking around, I found a tiny little pebble, and that little circular thing, those two circular things on it, are impressions of parts of crinoids, which are stemmed relatives of starfish and sea urchins.
Echinoderms.
Yeah. So I was like, that's it. Brooklyn is
Done.
taken. Done. Awesome. He was over the moon. And I don't know if you remember the original date. It's 1 day shy of a year from when I started. So we were hysterical. We were very excited. And I'm probably the only person that cares, but I'm the only person who's ever collected fossils in all 5 boroughs. And in a year, just to make it crazy. So, actually, go back one. So, in a sense, I can't even claim that I succeeded in doing what I set out to do. I wanted to find a fossil in every borough, with the thinking that it should be a fossil of an animal that lived in New York. The first 4 boroughs, if you remember me talking about them, they're all glacially transported things. Those animals didn't live here. So they're kind of a fail. It's not exactly what I wanted, but I'll take it. But the stuff in Rockaway Beach, those are animals that lived here. Those are definitely ancient animals that have been brought here by glaciers. They lived out in the sea there. However, analysis of those fossils has shown them to be between 7,000 and 12,000 years old. So if you remember my definition of fossils in the beginning, I may not have hit that goal either. Unless I do some very expensive analysis on the fossils, I don't know if I have anything over 10,000 years old. So I may have failed there too. So, but I'm not going to start it over. We're done with it. Next slide. But there are genuine New York City fossils. Some of them we have in our collections. This is very exciting to me. This is a fossil leaf, probably a laurel leaf from the late Cretaceous. It's around 65, 70 million years old. And it comes from Bushwick, and it was 125 feet underground. And it was collected by Dennis Askins in 1991. He's a New York City geologist, and he's brought into construction sites to advise on what's going on underground for the construction. And this was in one of the excavations for City Water Tunnel 3. And they busted right through the Cretaceous where there were lots of leaves, and they were just hauling the rock out, tossing it away. He rescued a whole bunch of it. And this is the only one he's given me so far, but he wants to give me his whole collection for us to put in the collection. And actually, one of the drawings that Alexis did was with some of the rock that comes from the side of this thing. So that's genuine.
Yeah, that shit's real.
That's the real deal.
Yeah.
So that's exciting. But the next one's even more exciting. This is a mastodon jaw from our collections that was found in 1925 in Inwood when they were digging the ground to make a building. This was for building construction. They were putting in a foundation and slammed it to a mastodon. And that's just about as charismatic as you can get. And
That's a tooth.
that's a jaw with 6 teeth in it. Yeah. And what's really interesting is, as I was doing my research to try to find out what has been found in New York City, I found at least 14 records of mastodon fossils turning up in the 5 boroughs. The problem is most of them were found really, really long time ago, when there was still that top layer of Pleistocene soil that could have contained them. But it preceded the time where there was somewhere proper to put them, like where I work. So they probably sat around as curios until they fell apart or got lost, and almost all of them are gone. We have 3, and the Staten Island Museum has 1 or 2, and that museum is actually the only place you can go that I know of that you can see genuine New York City fossils on display. I'm working on us. We'll get that done sooner or later, but right now they have to go down to Staten Island. And that's from our catalog card, that's the actual designation where it comes from, Dyckman west of Broadway, which I love. So this is,
With Upper Manhattan
yeah,
and Dyckman's Lower Manhattan, right?
well, Dyckman Street. It is.
No, it's way up there.
Way,
Oh,
way
yeah.
up there, yeah. In fact, it's one of those little dots on the top there.
So we went to Teague Triangle.
Yeah, which is right, yeah, one of his drawings comes from, a few of the drawings come from a little triangular shaped park right across the street from where that one was found.
That
And
was from 1840.
much earlier, yeah. And some mastodon remains were found there, and there's a possibility it's actually the same animal because they're so close in space. Let's see if I can get this thing going. So this map is my working map of all the sites that I've found in the literature and the ones that I visited of fossils in New York City. So you see that all the boroughs are covered, and or glaciers or anything else. So that's kind of an exciting, weird, leftover thing. that I slammed into. The potato is right there. I put it on there just because I had to. But
Where are those lower Manhattan things?
there's little bits of wood and seashells from like near the World Trade Center. Nothing fancy. There is one mastodon bone somewhere in there that was found in someone's cellar when digging up a cellar. And that's gone too, obviously. If you look here, there's quite a number of time periods that are represented. The Ordovician is the oldest and goes back to about 500 million years old. And the Pleistocene is, up to 10,000 years old. So there's a lot there. But keep in mind that a lot of that, like I said before, is not native stuff. Let's see, aside from that weird stuff in the rocks, those plants, Triassic, Cretaceous, and Pleistocene are probably what are actually here in New York City. So next slide. So I'll leave you with this strange diversion at the end. This is a tree called the Kentucky coffee tree. And you can see it all over the city. There's a whole bunch of them just north of Chelsea Piers in the park there. And it's what is called in biology an ecological anachronism. It's a plant that doesn't make sense today. Like the way the seeds and the pods are developed and how they evolve doesn't make sense with anything that's alive today. Nothing eats it. It's poisonous to most things. However, it's designed very much like the pods of plants that elephants eat today. And it looks like this was probably the food to the mastodons that lived here. And when you have a partnership between a plant and an animal, the animal is the more sensitive thing. If the animal loses the plant, it'll go extinct. But if the plant loses the animal, they often have other ways of surviving into the future. And this plant has other ways of propagating its seeds without the mastodon. But it's probably sitting there waiting for its fuzzy friend to come back. So that's it. The next slide is just the thank you slide. Thank you. Okay.
Any questions before we slide off into the inky abyss?
What keeps that plant alive, do you think? Why does it keep propagating itself?
Well, it seems like its partnership with the mastodon was in order to propagate the seeds. The animal would eat the pods. The seeds are too tough to chew up and digest, but the teeth would abrade them, and then in the guts they would get, further abraded by the acid, and then it would, shit it out with a huge pile of fertilizer. All good for the plant. But, so it's losing most of that. All over the Northeast, this plant can grow and it's very happy to grow, but in the wild it only grows near rivers because it needs now the rivers to abrade the seeds. And it can migrate downstream, but it can no longer migrate upstream or away from the
It
rivers.
doesn't have its animal partnership to go.
It's glued to the rivers, unless we plant it, which is probably why it's all over the city.
Oh, so you think it's been replanted?
Oh yeah, the ones that are in the city almost certainly were planted here. And I forgot, I actually have a fossil from Rockaway that I can pass around and show you guys. I didn't find it, but it's one of those crabs that I showed you a picture of. It's not the most beautiful thing, but if it's on the older side of Rockaway stuff, it's a real fossil. And on the other side is some scallops. You can see the shells stuck in the rock there.
So you both grew up in New York City.
Yeah.
Do you guys find that interesting, that the line of work you're doing and where you kind of grew up? Obviously,
Kind of, well, we're both natural historians, so we got to make do with what we have.
Yeah, it's the hand we were dealt.
And still, it gets us all around the world. I mean,
Yeah, and the thing is that there's an exoticism to finding things that are unexpected in a pile of garbage. I love the allure of that.
Definitely.
The disgrace of being in some horrible thing and then you find this magical thing in it. Like I used to go fishing in Central Park in those man-made ponds, and somehow there's like yellow perch, sunfish, largemouth bass. Like what?
right.
It's crazy.
I mean,
That's
Carl,
what I feel about this
in
stuff.
your world, do your colleagues find it interesting that you were born and raised in New York City? Is it kind of
I'm
an
rarely
anomaly? Is it
at
an
the museum.
anomaly?
Yeah, kind of. But they're all like, I guess they're all jealous in a way that I grew up here and I really got my dream job in the city.
Right.
Most of them had to travel for
It's
it.
like, curating, same thing,
very hard to have that.
It's amazing.
Where is the
Can't believe
paleontological
it's
society? Where is that?
It's not
Is
really.
it open to the public?
Yeah, yeah. They meet
Yes.
once a month for, I think, 10 months out of the year at the museum. They're not like a place, they're a group that, converges. And they give talks at those meetings, general talks about paleontology, but they also organize collecting trips from New York City all the way out to Ohio, sometimes farther south into the Carolinas, maybe even Florida, but usually in the local area here. Come on up.
My brother's out in California. He's pretty good at finding archaeological remains of Native Americans. And he says, what you need to do is just find a level place that's slightly elevated from the water, and there they are. So I'm guessing that you kind of have places like that beforehand are auspicious
Definitely.
for science.
Yeah,
So
for totally different reasons.
yeah, and tonight when Mary and I were walking up Greenwich Street, like at Greenwich and Leroy, where the old Gavin Brown gallery was, there's now this big hole in the ground. So I'm thinking, so
I like holes in the ground.
yeah, you like holes in the ground, but they also it also sounds like they have to be like really deep holes in the ground.
Not really,
Not
no. I
necessarily.
mean, all this stuff was on the surface. It depends, so for fossils.
Except for the
Well,
water tunnel.
That one was special, yeah. I mean, most of what we know of the fossil record is where the surface is eroded through those layers. We don't go tunneling into the ground for that reason, to look for fossils. We may do that and find stuff, but generally we find things exposed at the surface and only dig as far as we have to excavate the thing that's exposed there. I mean, we're very lucky because of the way Earth works. Earth is an enormously long story of deposition, raising of mountains, and then erosion. And if that wasn't happening, we'd have no picture of what was underground. We just pile up and we'd never have a window. But because it's moving all the time, the continents are tearing apart and falling apart and smashing into each other, there's always a slice through that stuff. It's very convenient.
Oh, I see. So you kind of look for the slices.
The right slice, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Sedimentary rock, right?
Uh-huh. And Alexis, do you ever work with fossils?
Well, their drawings are made out of fossil.
Right. Yeah, okay.
What do you mean work with?
Well, I meant, I guess, is the fossil imagery in your work? Like
When I did the
image of
project
fossils.
about the Burgess Shale, which is, I guess, Precambrian, right? Cambrian.
So it's like 530.
Yeah, which is now the top of the Canadian Rockies. It's a very exciting, sort of sexy moment in paleontology where there was an explosion of biodiversity, the types of which, after they went extinct, were never seen again. There's very little reference about what they look like, more so now, but when I was doing that was the late 90s.
That was the beginning.
Yeah, I have to look at and now there's a lot of stuff from China that's from the same era, which no one knew about in the late 90s. So I'd have to look at the fossils for reference. And I was making the drawings out of the fossils, so I'd have to pulverize the shit out of it I don't even remember what I was using. But I was with a Discovery Channel film crew at the top of the, Canadian Rockies on this site.
That's a cool site.
It's amazing. It's a big hike. And I remember getting up there, and it was the worst mosquitoes I've ever seen, right? Because there were all these glacial pools, and it was the middle of summer, so they were going crazy, these mosquitoes. And we'd have to be totally covered and breathe out of a straw. It was so intense. But, so we're up there, and it's a long hike, and it's not terrible, but it's pretty rough. And someone who was with us said, oh yeah, David Attenborough was up here last year, he took a helicopter. It's that's a different budget. Well, he's also 80. But.
Yeah, give him a break.
Yeah.
What's your next project?
I'm working on a project about the Great Lakes, actually. Speaking of glaciated puddles. So I've been working on that since 2013. So it's going to be drawings like this that I've started, and then 5 very large paintings also. So it's going to open in 2018. Better get on it. I have 3 finished and I have 2 to go.
Better go.
I know. Tomorrow morning.
You work pretty fast, right?
sort of?
Well, the paintings are just, they're made out of oil paint, but I've got 50 drawings that I've made already from different parts of the Great Lakes. So, yeah, I took a number of trips around various lakes over the last couple of years. Yeah.
So this paleontology that you're researching pretty much always predates human history, is that right? Or is there a
No,
cross?
there's an overlap, yeah, I mean, humans, anatomically modern humans, what we call ourselves in paleo, I think we go back 200,000 years.
Oh,
So
okay,
it's
so
well into the, like what I consider fossil, and if you talk about other kinds of humans, it goes back a couple of million.
Yeah, like 2 million.
Yeah,
so is there ever an interest in archaeology as well?
of course. I should have mentioned this earlier, but Fee was with me, was it last
New Year's Eve.
New Year's Eve 2 years ago, I was going through withdrawal because I wasn't collecting for a while. And
It's a funny withdrawal.
it's a fever. You gotta find stuff, look for stuff. And I was almost in a panic, and I said, we have to go out collecting somewhere. And it's, it's cold out, and most of my sites are wet, so it's not really where I want to go to. Let's go to Rockaway. We always have success there. And I was basically totally skunked on fossils, but where the waves pull away that last bit of sand and you get a little vertical face on the beach. It was really crammed with pebbles and large bits of stuff, so I said, this is where we're going to find something. I got to look in there. And I don't know, 10 minutes of that, and I found a spear point on the beach in Rockaway, and I almost had a baby. She didn't know for a while what it was because I was just cursing and jumping around on the beach. I got to calm down before I could tell her what it was.
Wow.
So anything old is exciting, and the older it is, the more exciting it gets.
There's a guy, Lawrence Cook, who created the Native American Museum in Montauk. He just created it, and he waded into he found most of the artifacts personally that he has in his museum, and he waded into Fort Pond, because I saw you have Fort Pond there, and found these things like in the water. So yeah,
Is
it's
there still stuff
astonishing.
there?
Jealous.
Yeah.
He's going.
Yeah. She's nudging you.
This fossil was from New York, Carl? This,
Rockaway, yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
crazy.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
I've yet to find one of those.
Is this, would you consider this one of your better finds?
I didn't find that.
Ah,
So
okay.
I got that from someone else.
Okay.
But I'd be very excited to find one of those. That's why I keep going back there, because I need to find one of those. And they turn up often enough. I've seen them in a lot of other people's collections, so it's worth, keep trying.
That's amazing.
Cool, huh?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I actually have a question for Alexis.
Yeah.
How do, like in the process of these shows that you sort of put together, how do these more like natural pieces then inform the bigger,
They don't have
larger
anything to do
things?
with it.
Okay, I was
I
wondering.
mean, they're
along
completely
those-
like, apples and oranges.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
and I like it like that because there's something so immediate about making them, and there's a level of failure. They're very risky. To be good, they have to sort of dance on that edge of disaster. And there are plenty of disasters that get torn up.
Does your research ever play into both, or is it really kind of like separate?
No, the research does play into
Yeah.
both. They're often, I could easily make paintings about the history of New York if the right opportunity happened, but, information is information. So, yeah. Exactly.
That's a nice thing to say.
Yeah, it's all like magical and enticing.
Oh, the drawings are amazing too.
Thanks. They're pretty cool.
And it's visual information. What your paleontology works with is visual information.
Yeah,
right? So-
and also to give a little background, I grew up in Manhattan, and my mom used to work at the Museum of Natural History also,
Oh, wow.
and she's an archaeologist. So I grew up going and looking at the Charles Knight paintings, and that's what inspired me to want to be an artist.
Nice. Sounds like a good
Oh,
time.
yeah.
Wow.
If you can, you really should see the paintings, because up close they have
They're pretty good paintings.
stuff, they're made of stuff.
Yeah.
Cigarette butts and leaves and sand.
Oh, you mean my things?
Yeah,
Oh,
these
yeah.
things.
No, I'm talking about Charles Knight, thank you. But
He used cigarette butts, didn't he?
I don't know about that. Yeah, no, there's cigarette butts and glass and, pubic hair and blood.
They look so
fecal
much
matter.
different up close.
Yeah, they're very
So
physical.
much cooler.
Yeah. All right, well, it's getting late.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.